Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Jane Passioni, Managing Director of Collective Impact at the San Antonio Area Foundation. I get to lead the SALSA initiative, which is Successfully Aging and Living in San Antonio. I'm joined by my colleagues today, Deborah Chevron from the Accessibility Compliance Manager with the City of San Antonio's Disability Access Office. That's a mouthful. And Melanie Cawthorne with Executive Director of Disability SA. It is my honor to thank you for joining us today for the fourth, I can't believe we've already done this, fourth in a series of 5 conversations around cultivating community resilience, housing, and the disability lived experience. We do hope you will save the date and plan to attend the 5th session on January 20th as we collectively build strategies for action items to move our community towards forward on one of its most pressing issues, housing. Today, we will learn from the diverse perspectives of the disability community as panelists share their experiences and strategies for identifying and removing barriers to finding affordable and accessible housing in San Antonio. So as Debbie mentioned earlier, the captioning is available by clicking the CC icon in the Zoom toolbar. And thank you to our ASL interpreter for being available today. And you can pin that to your panel. We welcome questions and comments to be placed in the chat. And if we don't get a response to you today because of our short time, we will be following up with answers and additional information to following today's session. Today's session is even shorter than we thought it would be because of our little snafu at the beginning, but it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, my friend, Debbie Chevron, who will guide us through a reflective conversation with our panelists today. So Debbie, as I said before, is the Accessibility Compliance Manager for the City of San Antonio. In this role, she leads the Disability Access Office in efforts for citizens, excuse me, regardless of ability, to engage fully in community life. She is responsible for ensuring city programs, services, and facilities are universally usable to all by leading interdepartmental initiatives to remove barriers and reduce disparities through research, education, and partnerships. She comes to the position with more than 25 years of experience working with people with disabilities as an educator and a certified therapeutic recreation specialist. I don't think I knew that, Debbie. I learned something new every day. And she's an accessibility specialist. So I'm going to hand it off to Debbie to guide us through the conversation.
Well, thank you, Jane. And I am actually just going to really turn it over and I'm going to do the quick introductions of our panelists today so we can get into the meat of today's conversation. So our first panelist is Tracy Lewin, who is the Director of Events for Hemisphere, and she's been married to her spouse for 16 years and is the mother of 3. Her youngest son has a diagnosis of bilateral schizencephaly. Oh, that's a tongue twister, Tracy. Living the journey with her son was the inspiration for her launching a community initiative called Changing SA, which seeks to raise awareness about the need for and lack of adult-sized changing tables in our community. She currently lives in a single-family home with her multi-generational family. Our second panelist today is Jennifer James, and she is a former hospice social worker and is the mom of grade school age twins and 2 rescue mutts. She is living with 5 autoimmune diseases and a genetic connective tissue disease and considers herself America's #1 utilizer of the medical industrial complex. And she currently lives in a single family home with her children. Our third panelist is Susan Garza. She attended Chaminade University of Honolulu, where she studied biology. She's been living with a progressive autoimmune disease since she was 16 years old and recently went through a health crisis where she was placed on a ventilator for 10 days and came home with a PEG tube and tracheostomy. She currently lives in a duplex that she shares with her parents. And our fourth and final panelist is Sheri Smith, who is an ombudsman outreach specialist with the Alamo and Bear Area Agency on Aging. Her husband has advanced Parkinson's disease and requires the use of a wheelchair and walker, and her son became a paraplegic from a virus in 2017 and uses a wheelchair full-time. She currently lives in a single-family home with her husband and son. So I want to say thank you to all four of our panelists, and we're going to go diving right into our first question, where Sheri, I'm going to start with you. What are the challenges or barriers to finding and securing living arrangements that you've experienced?
When we realized that my husband was going to become where he needed accessible equipment and had some was going to require additional equipment and means of getting around in a house, we looked at trying to find a house that would accommodate all of us. And literally, there was just nothing. Trying to find a home that was suitable for a family of 5 and could meet his requirements was just overwhelming and next to impossible. And so we ended up actually adding a wing to our house in order to accommodate what we knew was coming down the road.
And so, okay, so you couldn't find any housing stock and you ended up building for yourself.
Yes, ma'am.
Amazing. So Susan, I'm going to ask you the same question. What were the challenges and barriers to finding and securing living arrangements that you've experienced? And you are still on mute.
Hello. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. So to answer the question, the only place I've had to find housing is on my university campus. And it always depended on each semester on my finances, where I would live. So for example, if I had to live on campus, the only thing I had to worry about was getting around the campus itself. And the difficulty I had there was if I had a flare up from my lupus, I would need a wheelchair, but I had no arm strength for a manual one, and I couldn't afford an electric one. So the school did accommodate in that they would let me ride with the security guard and the little golf carts around campus. So that was solved. But another issue I had was transportation off campus. So one semester I did have to live off campus because I could not afford the meal plan. So that semester was just starting and I ended up having a flare up. And unfortunately, I was on the 4th floor. So I remember when I had to go to class during my flare up, I went down the flight of stairs and I was in so much pain. I realized I probably wasn't going to be able to handle the semester. And that day I decided that I was going to go to campus and just take off the semester. And I was going to get the bus. I missed the bus and I just started crying from frustration. And as I was walking back on campus, the security guard came in the car and they're doing the security check. But he lowered the window and he looked over at me and he asked me, "Hey, Susan, do you need a ride to campus?" And when he said that, I was like, "Oh, are you guys accommodating now?" And he's like, "Yeah, we decided this semester to start, transporting students with disabilities or anything of that matter." And as soon as he said that, I just wiped the tears off my face and I jumped into the car. And thanks to that accommodation, I was able to graduate from university. So for me, it was the housing, transportation to and from, which was the biggest obstacle. Luckily, it was met. And as far as the accommodations in the apartments, that was very well met with the university, like with handlebars for the shower, a bench, things like that. And other than that, those were my biggest challenges for housing.
And I'm so glad that you brought this up, Susan, because I think over the conversations that we've had, I don't think anyone else has brought up what happens to youth and teenagers with disabilities who are now aging and going into university. And so how do we build university housing and help make sure those accommodations are there and met? So it allows everybody to have the opportunities that anybody else would have going to college, university. So I think it's really important that you brought that conversation to the forefront. Jennifer, I think I'm going to go to you next. So talk to me about what your challenges and barriers have been in finding and securing living arrangements. and you are mute.
For me, mobility is not usually an issue. So my biggest concern right now, the thing I wanted to raise the most, is that I currently own my home with no mortgage, and I am still scared to death that I will be forced to move because I can't afford my property taxes because of the rising home values. And the city of San Antonio has enabled a tax freeze for the 65 plus crowd. But those of us on Social Security disability have just as fixed of an income. And mine's not going anywhere. And in fact, when you take Social Security disability, you have to agree to take less than your full retirement amount. So most of us are making even less money than those people who are able to retire. So with the home values rising, my 2020 property taxes were even more with the disability discount that the city of San Antonio offers than they were without it in 2018. Because in two years, my home value went up so much that my property taxes are still more than they would have been 2 years ago without the discount. So I wanted to advocate for a property tax freeze for those of us on disability as well, because otherwise I might be forced to leave a home that I love.
Well, and I can imagine that causes a lot of stress, and I can imagine this being a conversation for many people with disabilities as they want to potentially, like, their disease or their disability will bring changes in the future. You may need some physical accommodations and modifications to your home, but I can believe that probably is very stressful for you because you don't want to spend the money to remodel your home if you need it, if you don't know if you're going to be able to afford to stay.
Yes.
Right.
Everything about it is stressful.
Just one more piece to add to the stress: property taxes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So Tracy, we're going to go to you. So talk to us about what have been your challenges or barriers in finding or securing living arrangements that you've experienced.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Debbie. So our biggest challenge as we realized that we needed a home with accommodations as our son was getting older was that we couldn't necessarily choose where we wanted to live and keep in close proximity to doctors and specialists. We had to choose really whoever we could find that would work with us. And so we could not afford to do a custom build. And so we ran the gamut all across San Antonio, including the outer limits, surrounding counties, surrounding cities, to figure out who had a spec home that would be willing to modify as it existed and make small changes to it. And so it was really difficult and feel like we didn't have control over choosing where we wanted to live. And it was really about whoever would work with us. And that's where we were going to end up. And so it's really challenging to be able to navigate on an already challenging situation.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I find that quote that you just said pretty amazing. I couldn't choose to live where I wanted to live. And I think that's something that our attendees need to keep in mind as they hear all of our panelists' stories and experiences, because that's basically what happens, regardless of the disability, regardless of what the issue is. They don't have the same choices as people without disability because of the accessible housing stock, lack of the accessible housing stock. All right, so I think we're going to go on to question number 2. So Jennifer, I think I'm going to start with you. So what are the accessibility features in your home that you depend on or cannot live without?
Well, I think for me, the question is about the future. And this is something I also want to speak to from my experience as a hospice social worker. Pretty much anyone who is fortunate enough to age will eventually need a walker or a wheelchair or have a difficult time rising from low surfaces. I've had surgery on my ankle twice, and I needed to be non-weight bearing after each surgery for 2 months. And standard bathroom doors are 28 inches wide, and that's not even wide enough to accommodate a walker. So here I was post-surgery, hopping sideways into my bathroom on 1 foot with the walker when I was already unstable and risking possibly another fracture. So because nearly everyone, nearly all of us will eventually need assistive devices when we're older, I am hoping that home builders could build a standard wider door for all of the doorways in the home, or make taller toilets standard, because those are very difficult to rise from if you don't have lower body strength, the short little toilets. So, I mean, it seems to me those are two things that if home builders could make them standard would help everyone eventually.
All right, thank you. So Tracy, how about you? What are some of the features that you have in your home that are really just absolute necessities for you and your family?
Definitely a barrier-free shower. So something that is easy to roll in, his manatee bath shower chair, lower light fixtures. So at a level where when our son is in his wheelchair, if he needs to access it, or anyone visiting our home that needs that ability to do so can and feel independent. And then the one thing that was also important for us as to build for the future, I'm 5'2" on a good day, and Mason is creeping up on me rather quickly. And so not only for me, but for every other caregiver, reinforced beams in our attic so that we could do a motorized lift system. So, you know, all of those things we could not function without. They make the day-to-day care of Mason so much easier than it should or have to be. You know, you're constantly struggling. And as we age as caregivers, our body is fighting against us. And so having these resources and tool to safely care for him have been the biggest things for us in our home.
And I think that's important to note, that these features are not, especially when you're talking lift systems and you start talking aging caretakers, it's a safety issue for both the caretaker and the person with the disability that needs the assistance. And I think that's something that a lot of our home builders and our developers haven't quite connected that comment and that thought in their head, that this is really a safety issue. Because you know as well as I do, they output fire alarms, they output smoke alarms, and this is having those types of structures are definitely a safety feature that we need. So Susan, let's go to you. What are some of the accessible features that are really necessities for you?
Yes. So I also agree that they're also for safety, because now that you mention it, before I got my the high rising, they sell them on Amazon. You add like a seat to the toilet to make it higher. Before I bought that, I actually had a fall because my mom could not help me get up correctly from the toilet. So I've always made sure to have that in the house on every floor. The next one is the chairlift. So I'm still waiting for that. However, I actually recently had an emergency Tuesday night. I had a supraventricular tachycardia and my heart rate was 250 beats per minute. And I obviously need to get out of the house as soon as possible. So I had to get the EMS here. I had to tell them to please come upstairs because I'm not able to get out quickly. And they have to administer adenosine intravenously in my room. So luckily they're able to do that. So they came and they administered it. They had to slow my heart rate, which is pretty much like stopping it. Luckily I didn't need to have the defibrillator bring me back or anything. They said it worked wonderfully. And I'm thankful I can be here for the panel for that. But I did not have the chairlift, so it made it very difficult. They do have a special chair that they use to transport me down the stairs. And I used it, but oh my goodness, it hurts so much on the back. There's not even padding on the chair, and it's made for people with disabilities. So already I was like, I want to contact whoever designed this chair and like let them know, you know, my back is still hurting from it. And when I came back with the ambulance, they didn't even have one. They had to carry me in their arms up to my second floor. So already I know the chairlift is going to be a wonderful addition to my house. And I'll also be able to get out of the home easily to go to my doctor's appointments, because as of now, I'm stuck in my bed. I'm not able to get out. And other than that, the wheelchair, the electric wheelchair. I have a manual, but when I get the electric one, I'm gonna probably have to look into the doors and figure that out. So we might have to extend the doors out as well. So those are the ones I need.
So Susan, I am absolutely grateful that you are here today, because I think what you've experienced this week is important for people to understand that these are potentially daily or weekly occurrences, depending
Yes.
on somebody's disability. And these are not one-off issues.
Yes.
And the fact that EMS the first responders had to give you treatment in your bedroom and had to use, and basically all of these extra steps. And if it was life and death, how many seconds are being lost?
Yes.
You know, could one misstep by the first responder or by family, whatever, would that have caused a difference in the outcome? And I think the fact that people need to understand your disability, your diagnosis is not the disability, it is the environment.
Yes. It makes it so much harder.
Be independent, you are not necessarily disabled. It's the environment that is creating that barrier. And I think that is one of the best examples I've heard in a very long time to prove that point.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you're okay, and I'm very glad that you're with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sheri, I hate to put you on the spot and follow that.
Okay. Again, with 2 individuals in my home requiring wheelchairs or walkers, my problem began outside the home first. It was actually trying to get in the door and needing a ramp or a 0 threshold, which is, you know, a 1-inch threshold might as well be a 10,000 square foot mountain when you can't get over it. So it began with a ramp. The other indispensable item for us is bracing in the walls for support bars. If that was built at the beginning for homes, if they could anticipate that, it would be enormous, because everywhere that we've required bracing, we've had to tear out the walls and basically down to the studs and add bracing, which added a lot of expense. And then the other items we can't live without, 36-inch doors. This week, we actually were absolutely reminded of that, in that my son, who is disabled, lives in College Station, and we remodeled a house up there for the same reason. Couldn't find accessible housing that worked out for him. And in the course of that, we remodeled his bathroom and his room with 36-inch doors. Last week during finals, he had an issue with his toilet. It was leaking, it was non-functional. The problem was the other bathrooms in the house are not 36-inch doors. He can't access anywhere else. And that really hit home this week when I was calling anyone to come and help us in the middle of finals get my child the ability to access a toilet in a home. The other thing is a barrier-free shower. Anybody can use a barrier-free shower. For the elderly, one of our biggest problems is tripping over that little 4-inch curb that appears in so many of our showers. For my son, again, it's another mountain. He rolls in, with a barrier-free shower, he's able to toilet himself, shower himself, take care of his own needs. And for a 21-year-old, that is everything. So those are my indispensable items.
Again, every experience, people think, who don't have a lived experience of disability, I think they think these stories are one-time type of stories, but it is weekly occurrences for our community. And so I think this concept of universal design really needs to start sticking much more. All right, so question number 3 now, which Sheri, since we just kind of talked to you about all of these challenges with the remodels, can you talk a little bit more about those challenges you had in finding contractors when you did decide to remodel? Were there any issues with that?
Absolutely. Literally issues in just even having understanding of what we really needed. Whether it be the doors, one of the things we did, which helps a lot, is we have pocket doors, because when you're in a wheelchair and you go through a door and you're trying to shut it from the other side, it is very, very hard. And when you've got somebody, my son is paralyzed to his chest, and so without abdominal strength, it is something that is terribly difficult. Finding when we actually even rebuilt, when we built our wing, the contractor actually messed up on one of the door thresholds, and that 1-inch threshold was something that my son couldn't get over at first. And so we actually had to add a piece there in order to correct that. Having someone that, barrier-free showers are really not difficult. There are side drains now to keep the water contained. There are slide bar shower heads, but it was having to think about every single step. And I felt like it was something that I was constantly researching, and it just, the amount of stress that was created, because there really wasn't anybody saying, oh, you're going to need to think about this, or you're going to need to think about that, things that we hadn't considered. We were, my husband at the time was not in a wheelchair yet, and my son, it was just, out of the blue. So it's things that you don't necessarily think about that really bite you. The bracing, as I said, the bracing in the walls was incredibly important. And it was something that it was sort of like, oh, well, where do you put that bracing in the walls? And it's like, what you do is you put a board that's about 10 inches so that you have a lot of leeway to accommodate individuals. Not expensive in the remodel build portion of our home, very expensive in a remodel. And then also the other problem that we had is, by not having a contractor that really understood maybe what was going to be required and could make those suggestions accordingly, we wasted a lot of money trying to make things big enough for what we thought we would need, and not having maybe somebody experienced, and that, maybe that was my fault. I don't know. I mean, as I said, it is so stressful when you're dealing with the situation at hand of becoming where you need accessible equipment, and dealing with a disease, and dealing with a sickness, and then dealing with all of this too, where you can't get in your door, where there's nowhere to go.
So just having the contractors that don't have any knowledge just added to all of the stress and frustration, and it ended up costing you money in the long run too.
Yes.
Amazing. So Tracy, I think you've had challenges as well with contractors, and so can you talk about some of your experiences with contractors and the challenges that you experienced?
Yeah, so very similar to Sheri, we've had some of the similar challenges. We've been on both ends, both building a home, which our challenge there was, I would really like to see home builders provide an accessibility packet. So if a potential homeowner comes in and request it or wants it, that some of those things are already included, like a grab bar in your bathroom or the barrier-less shower. Those are things that you can pick and choose, because a lot of the modifications that we had to do and work with the builder in order to build our home are costly, which Sheri spoke to in her answer. And so some of those things should be standard that you can choose. And I would really like to see home builders provide that. The other thing that we've had a challenge with is a home that was 15 years old and, you know, has nothing that you need. And so you're coming in, and very much so, it was difficult to find a contractor that was willing to work with us. And I think one of the challenges, and I may not sound like it, but it's exhausting retelling your story over and over again and trying to educate and explain to someone why you need it a certain way when they don't have an understanding and they're trying to tell you, well, we can do it like this. You're like, nope, that's not what I need. There is a reason why I'm specifically asking for it in this way. And so the lack of education for contractors, the pool of contractors to pick from that would be willing really to go through the extra work. Oftentimes it's not a quick job that can just get done. There's other things that are impact, and it's kind of a domino effect. And so we've had it in both building and then in modifying an existing home. And we need change on both ends. And I think education is the biggest component here.
Well, and I think that idea of an accessibility pack, it's surprising that that's not done more often already. I mean, you get to pick out the color of your counters. You get to pick out what you want as this feature or that feature. So why aren't these features more automatically thought of? We're in a society that wants to age in place. Nobody wants to move once they build their home that they love and have it adapted to their individual needs. And so it makes wonderful sense. We may have to start knocking on some contractor doors, I have a feeling, after this. That's the January 20th conversation, what we're going to do as we move forward. So Susan, now I know we talked about it a little bit in the last question, but one of the things that I don't think our attendees know is that originally when you moved in with your parents, it was so you could be the caretaker for your aging parents. So can you talk about how this kind of role reversal and the challenges that are really happening, and so you can take back that caretaker role for your parents?
Yes. So like you said, naturally, every healthy person goes through the role reversal, which is where we take care of our aging parents. But little did I know I would have the reversal again, where they take care of me again. So I honestly assumed that my progression wouldn't be this quickly. So once this happened, I had to do everything myself through Medicaid. And I did have a caseworker, but honestly, I had so many modifications I had to do. And on top of that, my appointments, etc. So after hearing everybody else's stories, I understand now why it's taking so long for my chairlift to be installed, And I also did talk to someone through Medicaid, and I asked them, I was like, do you know how long this will take? Or do you know why it's taking so long? And she said, honestly, it's because we're having trouble finding a contractor who can install it in this area. So just like they had said, they're having trouble educating the contractors, finding one who can do it, finding some who are willing to do it. And like you heard my story before, I had this medical emergency, and I'm just really, really wishing to get this chairlift as soon as possible. So as long as I'm waiting for the chairlift to be installed, I'm also waiting for the barrier-free walk-in shower to be installed. I'm doing bed baths as of now. Until that, I cannot go to my doctor's appointments to get out of the house, maybe hopefully get this removed, my feeding tube removed. So as long as I wait for them, my parents unfortunately have to continue taking care of me, getting more stressed themselves, sicker. My dad is final stage renal disease. He goes to dialysis. My mother's also in a wheelchair. So we try to do our best as a family unit with our own disabilities, and I'm doing the most that I can as well with my diseases so that we don't stress each other out. We help each other out as much as we can. Where, for example, I cannot help physically, but I can help like make payments, or research things, be like the secretary of the home. That's pretty much how like the contractor part really impacts our lives, because we're waiting on them. And until then, my independence is also on the line, and I'm waiting I'm dependent on that.
You know, as I hear this, because the experience that I have with disability in the home does not necessarily come with the contractor conversation. And I'm angry for all three of you. And for everybody else, even though I know logically we go, okay, contractors, we're waiting for contractors, they're backed up, supply chain issues right now, but I'm still angry for you.
Yes,
I think this is one of those moments where it's like, I want to say a lot of negative words. and just say it's not okay. And
yes.
we've got to figure out how the system work for the people who are actually in the system.
Yes.
You know, whatever system we're talking about, whether we're talking about the housing industry, SS, you know, Social Security, disability world, Medicaid, all of that. I think it needs to start focusing more on people. All right, so that's my spiel right now. So I think we're going to move on to our last question, which is really, I just want to get everybody's last thoughts. If you could say one thing to all of our attendees and everybody who is going to watch this, the recorded version of this, what's one insight or solution or thought that you'd like to share regarding this situation and these issues? Jennifer, would you like to tell us kind of what your thoughts would be?
Yeah. So I think the one thing I would like to impart is that people tend to think that disability looks a certain way. They either think of the very young or the very old or people who utilize wheelchairs, and that's all very true. But sometimes disability looks like me. And I know that as back when I could work as a hospice social worker, the people I had the hardest time helping were people in my age group, because charities and government resources have been set up to help the very young and the very old. But there was practically nothing I could do for those people who were dying in their 30s or their 40s. And so the one thing I would like to see is that if there's a charity set up to help with rental assistance or mortgage payments or utility assistance, it shouldn't matter what age you are. Like if you're poor and you need help, and if it's specifically set up for people who are sick, what difference does it make if you're 5, 15, 55, or 85? Like if you're poor and sick and need help, you're poor and sick and need help. So I just like to impress upon everyone that the way we think disability looks isn't always how it looks.
And I think that's so important, because I can tell you, we've had conversations from my office perspective, dealing with organizations or other departments where they're not seeing disability in that 18 to 64 age range. And I think we definitely need to do a better job in having disability seen across the age spectrum. Thank you. So, Susan, what would be your one thought or thoughts that you'd like to share and kind of leave with our attendees?
Yes, I think this is where we all pretty much agree that education, it's one of the big pillars that we need in order to get all of this fixed. Because like as some people have also mentioned, it is exhausting explaining over and over what your needs are, because each of us, we basically have very similar needs for the most part. You know, there might be a little detailed things that each of us needs as well, but for the most part, we have the same needs. And until we can communicate that with them, it's going to keep being a struggle and just making it harder for both parties, honestly, not just us, but them, because they're not going to probably want to work with people with disabilities for the same reason, because it's so stressful in general. I'd also want to let people know that it's also the costs. Like there's a lot of hidden costs that we don't think about with chronic disease. Like my flare-up started in right when the pandemic was pretty much starting, I started. And in those 6 months alone of the beginning of that year, I spent about $10,000 on just not even home modifications, but items I needed around the house. And Jeff Bezos made a lot of money off of me that year, because I was always finding little things, knickknacks, and like, oh, maybe this weird little sock thing can help me put on myself. Like, I was probably a product tester, honestly, but it was just so like when we made we figured out the cost. That was $10,000 in 6 months, and I got in trouble obviously, but I was trying to survive, and in that time, that was before like my ventilator, and before I knew I was going in a health crisis. And but I still needed more items when I got out of the hospital. I needed storage for all my medical supplies. I needed sometimes the DME companies don't deliver on time, so I have to buy it myself. Like a humidifier, compressor, nebulizer. I have my hospital bed. Like there's just so many hidden costs that just pop up as well with chronic disease that I think a lot of people don't realize that we spend money on. So for the most part, yeah, I would just like people to know a little bit more about these things, because then they can understand where we're coming from, why we're frustrated or stressed, and that all we really want is help. Like that we shouldn't be having to go through all these obstacles just to get some of our basic needs met for our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you there's an organization called the National Disability Institute, and they did a research study over the last couple of years, and they basically say, I want to believe it's 28% more to be cost of living, 28% higher for a person with a disability, for all of those hidden costs that you're talking about.
Yes.
Just to kind of survive. So there is data out there, and I think that's one of the things that, as we talk about accessible and universal design housing, that we need to talk about how we can make that affordable and not out of reach for anyone who might need that. So thank you. So Sheri, why don't we go to you? What would be your thoughts that you'd like to share with our attendees?
First of all, I love the idea about an accessibility pack being something that people could get when they are constructing homes. But here's what I have to say. We need legislation so that universal design is incorporated in every home, apartment, dorm room, and motel built from now going forward. For my son, who is 21, when somebody finally gets beyond the chair and sees him as a person and says, hey, you want to come over? We're having dinner on Friday. His question needs to be, what can I bring and what time? And not, can I enter your house? Can I get to the door? Can I use your restroom?
Powerful, Sheri, very powerful. Thank you. And Tracy, we're going to go to you now. What would be your one thought that you would like to leave with our attendees?
I think I'd like to see our housing industry better trained and better prepared to serve our community. And one of the things that I think would be awesome to have, we have so many agencies that offer advocates or liaisons to help you navigate a process. There should be some type of housing representative that can, help a family. We are oftentimes as caregivers inundated with information that we have to sort through already that is life and death for those that we love. And to try to navigate that entire process of just where you're going to live or how you're going to live in your home, it would be really great if this was a resource that was available so that the industry could take advantage of having an expert at the table to help navigate the process, a resource of directories of who's been trained, contractors that are available, people who understand the process, the lingo, if you will, the glossary of terms. I often feel like I should have a sheet typed up and just hand it to somebody so that they understand what I'm about to say, instead of having to define each of those words while I'm having the conversation. So education, I think it's a thread that has been shared over and over again by each of the panelists in our answers and in our experiences. So education for the housing industry and change.
Thank you. And I just want to say that was the end of our question session portion of this panel. And I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists before I pass it over to my colleague, Jane Passioni, to kind of oversee the wrap up and question section, question and answer area. So Jane, you're on mute. Take it away.
Actually, it was going to be Melanie.
Yep, Jane passed it along to me. So I will, let's see, there we go. I will pop myself up in here. Again, panelists, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you are asked to repeat your stories over and over again. And I know that sometimes it feels like you've done that and it hasn't made a difference. But we are dedicated and looking forward to taking the stories that you've shared, the information that we've learned already. I know that, you know, talking about dorm environments and college students, that's really something that hasn't been a part of the conversations we've been involved in. And you know, the education of contractors, we've talked about developers and builders and architects, but contractors hasn't been a part of that conversation. So even today, by taking the time and the investment in this housing panel, you've impacted the conversations that are going to go on in the city of San Antonio, because Deborah, Jane, and I are involved in this conversation, and we will bring those thoughts and ideas forward, as well as a number of the participants within our attendees today. They're in housing policy, they're in housing design, they're in affordable housing, they're in policy, they're in architecture, and they have listened to what you had to say. So thank you for that. Thank you to the attendees for dedicating your time to come and learn and take the things that have been shared today back into your industries. And let me just extend the invitation for everybody to join us again for session 5. Our panels are concluded, and session 5 will be where we start to build out those strategies to move our community forward in action. I've also posted in the chat, we've talked about, well, how do we get involved and how do we make a difference, and where are these conversations taking place? Again, forgiveness for the delay in starting today, but I was down at City Council today putting forward a support for the strategic housing implementation plan, which we've spent the last 14 months building out strategies for affordable housing in San Antonio. And that's in process right now. The UDC, which are Universal Design Code amendments, are now accepting feedback from the community. So there are training sessions on how you can get involved in that going on. And it's an open process. You just have to put in your suggestions. Also, within our housing bond that's coming up for election in May, or coming up for a vote in May, our housing bond committee just passed a parameter that will determine how the bond dollars are spent in building affordable housing. And one of those parameters were that projects that receive bond funding must provide 100% of units with universal design as defined by the Unified Development Code, one of those things you can submit amendments to right now, with a minimum of one ADA compliant pedestrian route to each unit when technically feasible. And all projects that receive bond funding must show a commitment to sustainability. So there are things that are happening. Your voices are being heard. And we just appreciate everybody's time and attention, dedication to this issue so that we can ensure that the considerations of people living with disabilities are a part of these conversations as we plan what the future of San Antonio looks like. And I didn't introduce myself up front, but I'm Melanie Cawthon and I'm the executive director at Disability SA. And here we have a vision to make San Antonio the #1 community where people with disabilities want to live, learn, work, and play. And we appreciate all of y'all being a part of that vision today. So I hope we see you on the 20th. Please be sure to register and join us. And we'll get our ducks in the row and we won't start late next time, but take care and happy holidays.